In the summer of 1956, Elvis Presley was 21 years old and had been the most famous person in America for approximately 6 months. He had not grown up expecting this. He had not built a strategy for it. He had walked into a recording studio 3 years earlier to make a birthday gift for his mother, and had stumbled into something that had no precedent and no instruction manual. And in the summer of 1956, at the height of the first great wave of it, he walked out of a recording session at RCA Victor Studios in New York City, got into a car, and told the driver to just drive. He did not return to the studio that day. He did not call ahead to say where he was going. The musician sat in the studio for 2 hours. His producer made calls. His manager made more. Nobody could reach him. Elvis came back the next morning. He sat down. He picked up where he had left off, as if nothing had happened. He did not explain. Nobody pressed him. For 60 years, those 6 hours were unaccounted for. In 2016, a woman named Caroline Marsh contacted the Elvis Presley estate through their official correspondence address. She was 78 years old. She was living in a retirement community in Savannah, Georgia. She was a retired school teacher in reasonable health, with a grandchild who had recently asked her to write down the things she remembered before they were gone. One of the things she remembered was a letter she had written in the summer of 1956, a letter she had never received a reply to, and a phone call she had received 3 weeks later that she had been thinking about, on and off, for 60 years. Caroline had been 18 years old in 1956. She lived with her parents in a row house in Queens, New York. Her father worked in a post office. Her mother cleaned houses. Caroline was a reader, a journal keeper, a person who paid close attention to the world and wrote down what she noticed. She was not a fan in the conventional sense. In the spring of 1956, Elvis appeared on a television special and performed, among other songs, Peace in the Valley. It was a gospel song, a simple, earnest song about a world beyond this one, a world without sorrow, without weeping, without the particular heaviness of being alive and human. Caroline heard it in her living room in Queens and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not excitement, not the response that this face and this voice were producing in girls her age across the country. Something quieter. Something that she spent several days trying to name before she sat down and wrote a letter. What she had heard in the performance, and she was careful to be precise about this when she described it 60 years later, was a quality of asking, not praising, not performing faith, asking. The sound of someone who wanted something to be true and was not certain that it was. Caroline grew up in a deeply religious household. She knew that song. She had sung it in church, in the flat, declarative way that congregations sing hymns, the voice of collective certainty. But she had never heard it sung the way Elvis sang it, with the specific frequency of doubt masquerading as devotion, or devotion masquerading as certainty. She was 18 years old and not sure she could tell them apart. But she could hear that they were different. She wrote her letter, 1 page, in her careful, precise hand. She addressed it to Elvis Presley, care of RCA Victor Records in New York. The letter contained one question. "When you sing that song," she wrote, "are you asking, or do you already know the answer?" She sent it. She did not expect a response. Famous people did not respond to letters from 18-year-old girls in Queens. She knew this. She sent it anyway, because the question had been living in her since she heard the performance, and writing it down was the only way she knew to put it somewhere. 3 weeks later, her family's telephone rang. Caroline answered it. A man's voice. Professional. He did not give his name. He said he was calling from RCA Victor. He said her letter had been passed along. He said it had been read. "Miss Marsh," he said, "I need to ask you not to write again." Caroline stood in the hallway of her family's house with the telephone receiver in her hand and tried to understand what she was being told. Not threatened, not scolded. Politely, carefully, firmly, asked not to write again. She agreed. She hung up. She stood in the hallway for a long time. Her letter had been read by someone, and the response to it, not to the letter but to the act of writing it, had been a phone call asking her not to do it again. She had asked a question about a gospel song, and someone had considered that question significant enough to call her personally and ask her to stop. Why? Caroline thought about this on and off for 60 years. She raised 4 children. She taught elementary school in Queens for 32 years. She read voraciously and thought carefully and lived an attentive, considered life. And she formed her own theory. Not from anything that was ever confirmed to her, but from the recordings, from the years of listening to Elvis sing gospel music, from the accumulating evidence of a voice that never stopped asking. Her theory was this: the phone call had not been made to protect Elvis from her question. It had been made because the question had been too accurate. Because someone in Elvis's circle had read an 18-year-old girl's letter and recognized that she had identified something that was either true and private, or true and dangerous, or both. In 2015, a music historian published a detailed account of Elvis's 1956 recording sessions. The appendix contained a single unexplained entry, a gap in the session log for a Tuesday in August. No explanation. No documentation of where Elvis went or why he returned the next morning. Just a gap. Caroline's granddaughter showed her the article. Caroline read the date. She read it again. She recognized it immediately. She contacted the estate. She brought the letter, the original, in her 18-year-old handwriting, preserved in a folder for 60 years. She brought the documentation of the phone call she had written down the same day it happened in the journal she kept. The historian who reviewed the material said that what struck him most was not the coincidence of the date. It was the precision of the question. Are you asking, or do you already know the answer? He said that in his years of working with Elvis's material, he had read thousands of letters, fan letters, business correspondence, critical analyses, academic papers. He had never read a question that went more directly to the center of what made Elvis's gospel performances what they were. Because the center was exactly that. The tension between certainty and doubt. Between singing, "I believe," and singing, "Please let this be true." Between the gospel tradition that had formed Elvis as a child, the full-throated, physical, unambiguous faith of the rural Southern church, and the man who had grown up to carry that tradition into a world that tested it. An 18-year-old girl in Queens had heard that tension in a single performance and had asked about it directly. The recordings from the day after the gap, the Wednesday, the morning Elvis came back, were reviewed in light of this. Several of the musicians present that day were interviewed in later years about the sessions. When asked specifically about the Wednesday recordings compared to the Tuesday work, a pattern emerged in the testimony. Something had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that could be measured or quantified, but in a way that the people in the room had noticed and remembered 40 years later. A quality in the performances, a settling, as if something that had been held in tension had found not resolution, but equilibrium. As if someone had sat with a question for 6 hours in the back of a moving car and come back knowing that the question itself was the answer. Caroline Marsh died in 2019. She was 81 years old. Her letter is now part of the Graceland archive. In the last interview she gave, to her granddaughter, for the thesis that eventually became something larger, she was asked if she had ever found out what those 6 hours contained. She smiled. "No," she said, "but I stopped needing to know a long time ago. The question I asked, it was the right question. I know that now, and whatever he did with it in those 6 hours was between him and the answer." She paused. She thought about something. "I think he was asking," she said finally. "I think he was always asking. And I think that's exactly what made it so beautiful." Because certainty can be performed, faith can be manufactured. Confidence in the words of a song can be constructed and sustained through technique. But asking cannot be faked. The specific frequency of a person who genuinely does not know the answer and is singing toward it, that cannot be manufactured. An 18-year-old girl in Queens heard it in 1956. She wrote a letter. And somewhere in New York City, on a Tuesday in August, the question found the person who had been living inside it. And he got into a car and drove for 6 hours, looking for an answer that may have been, all along, the asking itself.